I can still hear the sound of the notification. Just a simple ping, but it changed everything. It was an ordinary morning, the kind where the coffee still burns your throat and your body's already exhausted before the workday even begins. I sat down in the same cubicle as always, opened my laptop, and there it was, the email. Cold, blunt subject line, termination of contract. My name in the recipient field, not even a good morning. Just like that, I was erased. The screen blurred for a few seconds. I'm not sure if it was the tears or the rage burning behind my eyes. I read it over and over, as if somewhere in the fine print there'd be a "just kidding" hidden in the attachments. But there wasn't. It was real. After nearly 3 years of pouring my soul into that company, they tossed me out like a scribbled-up piece of paper. And the worst part, they didn't even have the guts to say it to my face. The manager's office was lit from behind the blinds. Cold, impersonal light. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding louder than my fists. He didn't even bother standing up. "It's a decision from higher up," he said, arms crossed like he was starring in his own power play. I almost laughed. If only he knew who that higher up really was. But I didn't say a word. Not yet. The pain had to speak first. I sat across from him. "What did I do wrong?" I asked. Not because I didn't know, but because I needed to hear him say it. I wanted him to admit I was invisible to him. He just shrugged. "It's not personal. It's restructuring. The most cowardly excuse in corporate vocabulary. A smokescreen to hide petty decisions made by small people. But I knew how to play that game too. The office walls seemed to stare at me with pity as I walked back to my desk. My coworkers avoided me like I was some kind of ghost. Only one person dared to look me in the eye, Anna from accounting. She offered me a quiet hug and I took it. For the first time that day, someone treated me like I was still human. On the way home, I mentally replayed every project I delivered, every sleepless night, every meeting where I swallowed my pride. And now, it all boiled down to one email notification. I wanted to scream. I wanted to make them see they were making a mistake. But more than anything, I wanted them to know who they were messing with. The letter was still in my bag. The same letter my father gave me before he passed away, naming me heir to 70% of the company he built from the ground up. For 3 years, I hid behind a name tag, watching, learning, waiting. And now, it was finally time to rise. But not as an employee, as the owner. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just sat on my bedroom floor and looked at the letter the way a warrior looks at a sword. The next day, I would return to that office, but not as a victim. I was going back to take what was always mine. And this time, no one was going to silence me. "What are you doing back here?" the receptionist asked, staring at me like I was a ghost she hoped had stayed buried. She clearly wasn't expecting to see me, especially not the day after I was let go. I smiled. Not the kind of smile that says, "Sorry to bother you," but the kind that says, "This is just getting started." "I came to pick up something personal," I said. And it was true. Something I had hidden a long time ago, and now, more than ever, I needed it with me. I walked slowly through the lobby, feeling every stare like a needle pricking my skin. Most people pretended not to see me. Some whispered. A few just turned away. I didn't blame them. Nobody wants to be associated with the woman who just got kicked to the curb. But what they didn't know was that, at that very moment, I was the most powerful person in that building. At the end of the hallway was my father's old office. Locked, of course. Ever since he passed, it had become a frozen time capsule. But I still had the key, tucked inside a locket I wore around my neck every single day. I opened the door slowly, like stepping into a sacred place. The scent of leather, old books, and bitter coffee hit me like a hug. My eyes burned, but I didn't let the tears fall. I knelt beside the bookshelf and pulled out a folder I had hidden there the day of his funeral. Inside were the documents proving my majority ownership in the company. That folder was my shield and my sword. I'd left it there on purpose, knowing that one day I'd need to return, not as a daughter in mourning, but as a warrior. And that day had finally come. A soft sound behind me made me turn. It was Marcello, the security guard. Same guy who'd worked with my dad for years. "Miss, you're not really supposed to be in here," he said, but his voice wasn't firm, it was gentle. I stood and looked him in the eyes. "He trusted you, Marcelo. So do I." He took off his cap, let out a long breath, and said, "If you need time, I'll stand guard outside." And just like that, I had the space I needed. I went home with my mind racing. I pulled out the will again. 70%. That number danced on the page like both a promise and a warning. My stepmother had tried to contest it. She failed. Since then, I chose to wait, watch, and learn. I worked like any regular employee for 3 years, quietly studying who deserved to stay and who didn't. That night, I made the call that would change everything. My lawyer, Enrique, picked up before the second ring. "Is it time?" he asked. "More than ever," I replied. "Schedule the shareholders' meeting for tomorrow." On the other end of the line, his silence said more than any words. War was coming at dawn. As I organized the paperwork, I felt my grief turn into strength. They forgot who I am, but I didn't. And starting now, no one else will forget either. "Here's to cleaning house." Those were the words my former boss said as he raised a glass of champagne in the executive cafeteria. It was Friday, and he was celebrating what he called a strategic reset. Little did he know his party had an expiration date. I watched from a distance, blending in with the staff on the ground floor, a baseball cap hiding my face, earbuds in, but playing nothing. Hearing my name tossed around between laughs made my stomach turn. "Finally got rid of that dead weight," he said. "Didn't do a thing, but still thought she was clever." Every word hit like a blade. I wondered if he truly believed that, or if he just needed to tear me down to feel big. Probably both. And while everyone laughed along, I spotted the discomfort in 1 or 2 faces, but no one spoke up. Cowards. I remember the first time I walked into that company. They stuck me in a tiny back room on the marketing floor. No windows, no ventilation. Still I smiled, because I was exactly where I wanted to be, watching. Back then, he barely knew my name, only cared about those in suits or with lips glued to his ego. And I was neither. I was just the founder's daughter in disguise. That afternoon, I went home and put on what I called my armor, a navy blazer that belonged to my dad, and a pair of shoes he had custom-made for me before he passed. Every time I wore them, it felt like he was walking beside me, like I was carrying his legacy on my shoulders. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be watching from the sidelines anymore, I'd be standing at the center of the room. The shareholders' meeting was set for 10 a.m. Enrique, my lawyer, was already organizing the files. "They still have no clue, do they?" he asked, flipping through the documents. "Not a clue," I replied. "And that's how I want it." He chuckled. "You're more like your father than you realize." I nodded. Inside, I was shaking, but not from fear. It was power rising in my veins. Before bed, I pulled out an old envelope from the closet. Inside was a letter, handwritten by my father, dated just 2 days before he died. "They'll try to erase you, but you carry my essence. Remember, true leadership doesn't scream. It commands with the silence that makes others listen." I read that line at least 10 times before closing my eyes. Tomorrow, I would be that silence. I woke up with sunlight flooding through the window and an odd sense of calm in my chest. I got dressed without saying a word, grabbed the folder of documents, and before walking out the door, I looked in the mirror like I was seeing myself for the first time. That woman wasn't the one who got fired. She was the heir, the strategist, the woman who moved like a ghost for 3 years just for this moment. And when I stepped into the lobby of that building, for the first time in weeks, everything stopped. The receptionist's coffee cup shook in her hand. Conversations died mid-sentence. And my former boss, standing with his back to me, turned slowly, wearing a smile that vanished almost instantly. Because in that moment, he still thought I was a shadow. But I was about to turn on every light. When I stepped into the boardroom, every pair of eyes turned toward me, confused, uncomfortable. "This meeting is for shareholders, not former employees," one of the board members said, adjusting his tie like he was trying to tighten control over the room. I walked straight to the head of the table without flinching. Enrique followed behind me, carrying the black folder. I laid my documents down. That's exactly why I'm here. My former boss sat on the far side of the table. The arrogance in his eyes had faded into a mix of confusion and nerves. "What's going on here?" he asked, trying to laugh it off. I calmly took a seat, opened the envelope with my father's will, and slid the papers across the table. "Did you know 70% of this company belongs to me? Well, now you do." The room went dead silent. One of the shareholders picked up the document, his eyes widening before he passed it down the line. Enrique stood behind me, arms crossed like an invisible bodyguard. "This information is legitimate. It's been verified and on record for 3 years. None of you ever thought to ask who she really was." The shock spread like an electrical current. Their world was flipping upside down, and I hadn't even raised my voice. My ex-boss shot to his feet. "This is outrageous. This company runs on structure, not personal vendettas." I looked him dead in the eye. "A vendetta would be suing you for every toxic decision you made while pretending I didn't exist. This is justice. And leadership." The color drained from his face. For the first time, he had no comeback. I went on. "For 3 years, I worked alongside you all. I watched everything. I saw who truly cared about this company and who was just here to pad bonuses and inflate egos. And now, as the majority shareholder, I plan to make some changes. Big ones." You could feel the tension clinging to the air. No one moved. They knew they were looking at someone who had already won, without even needing to shout. Enrique pulled out a second envelope. "These are the new restructuring terms. Effective immediately, the presidency transfers to Ms. Martins." The same board member who tried to block my entrance earlier cleared his throat, visibly thrown. You're taking over." I smiled, a trace of irony in my voice. "No, I already have." My ex-boss stepped forward, his voice suddenly low and cautious. "If this is about the email, I was just following protocol. I can fix it, if you'll give me a second chance." I looked at him like I was watching a building collapse in slow motion. "You had your chance, and you blew it. As of now, you're officially terminated." The word terminated had never felt so heavy. He stood there, pale and stunned, without a leg to stand on. As I walked out of that room, the looks I got were different. No longer pity or dismissal, now it was respect. Maybe even fear. But I didn't care what they felt. What mattered was what came next. Because that day, I didn't just reclaim my position. I reclaimed my voice. And for the first time, they heard it loud and clear, even in silence. The days that followed were quiet, but not in a good way. There was a tension in the air I knew all too well, fear masked as respect. The corridors, once filled with forced laughter, were now awash with sidelong glances. Some even assumed I'd go on a firing spree as payback. But they didn't really know me. They never even bothered to try. The old boss left without a goodbye. He took with him the glass-walled office, the exclusive coffee machine he alone used, and that oppressive culture he'd implanted in every corner. In his place, I left the president's door wide open. Literally. "If I have to hide behind a closed door, it means I don't deserve to be here," I told Enrique. He smiled. "Your father would be proud." I swallowed hard. It still stung to think about that. I began making changes from the inside out. Not with harsh cuts, but with conversations. I called every team, listened to the unheard, the overlooked, the weary. I unearthed talents buried under egotistical managers. I gave a voice to those who'd never had a microphone. It was strange to see faces light up when they were finally heard by the boss, as if kindness were a rarity at the top. Not everyone reacted well. One director called me an amateur in an email where I was accidentally copied. I could have fired him on the spot, but I chose to have a conversation instead. "Do you really believe that, or are you just too scared to admit a young woman can do better than you?" He didn't reply. In that silence, I saw his ego crumble. I started receiving anonymous notes. Some were thanks, others bitter. "You're tearing down everything we built." Finally, someone who sees us. "Who do you think you are?" I kept every note in a folder. Not out of vanity, but to remind myself that leading is like walking on broken glass. Every step must be deliberate. Sometimes, I'd find myself staring at my father's chair. It still sat in that same room, now transformed into a space of memory and inspiration. I would sit there on quiet afternoons when the building was nearly empty, and there, away from prying eyes, I would cry, not out of weakness, but out of relief, out of honor, for him. One afternoon, Anna, the same woman from accounting who embraced me when I was fired, came in with tear-filled eyes. "Thank you for coming back," she said. "We were losing ourselves in here." I stood up, took her hands, and replied, "I didn't come back, Anna. I just stopped hiding." She smiled, for the first time, a genuine smile. And in that moment, I realized that taking the throne isn't about ruling, it's about serving, about restoring everything that was ripped away. And above all, making sure that no one else ever has to go through what I did, so they can finally be heard. 3 months had passed since the meeting. The company wasn't the same anymore, and honestly, neither was I. I traded glass walls for open windows. Rigid hierarchies turned into real conversations. The once quiet headquarters now buzzed with life, energy, and exchange. But the biggest change, the way people looked me in the eye, not with fear, with hope. The decisions weren't easy. Some layoffs were unavoidable. I cut ties with those clinging to the old ways, flattery, secrets, locked doors. There was pushback, headlines, but there was also a record-breaking quarter. Not because we chased profit, but because when real people work with purpose, results follow naturally. A few weeks ago, I got a letter from my stepmother. She wrote that my father never should have left so much power in the hands of an inexperienced girl. I laughed, not out of spite, but because I finally understood. Her fear was never about losing the company. It was about someone like me proving that strength has no age, no gender, and that justice never asks for permission. One day, I called a company-wide meeting. I stood on the small stage in the auditorium and told my story from the very beginning. No filters. I spoke about the silent daughter, the invisible employee, the woman who nearly believed she wasn't enough. When I finished, there was no loud applause, just silence. The kind that only comes when truth lands hard in every chest at once. After that, I launched a new project, internal scholarships. Employees with potential from any department could now pursue their education with full support from the company. Anna, from accounting, was the first to sign up. "I want to study psychology," she said. "I want to help women who've lost their voices." I couldn't hold back the tears. It felt like the wheel was finally turning the right way. One Saturday morning, I went back to my father's old office. It was untouched, but something had to change. I removed the gold plaque on the door, Founder's Room, and replaced it with a new one. Simpler, but heavier in meaning, Room of Essence. Because what he built, it was never about control. It was about purpose. And now, it was my turn to keep that purpose alive. Before leaving, I placed a handwritten letter on his desk, just like he used to do. "Dad, I didn't do everything right, but I did it with honesty. Thank you for believing in me before I even knew who I could become." I folded the letter and laid it next to his favorite coffee mug, still stained with old memories. It was my way of saying I did it. No shouting, no begging. My way. As I stepped into the lobby, the sunlight poured through the glass entrance. And right there, beneath the company's logo, I finally realized this place carried my name, not the last name I inherited, but the one I built. The one forged in silence, scars, and hard decisions. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything to anyone.